Long before the world went crazy for the Bugatti Veyron, Koenigsegg Jesko, or Pagani Zonda, a machine was being created in a small German workshop that was supposed to change the history of hypercars. It was called the Lotec Sirius and looked as if it had arrived from the future. It was low, wide, absurdly powerful, and surrounded by mystery. At a time when most supercars barely exceeded the limit of 330 kilometers per hour, the creator of the Sirius claimed that his design would reach more than 400 kilometers per hour. Most interestingly, there was no giant automotive corporation, no billionaires, and no team of Formula One engineers behind it. Behind the project stood one man, Kurt Lmidt, a mechanic, racing driver, and visionary who decided to create his own dream car. The Sirius was intended to be Germany's answer to the McLaren F1 and the later Pagani Zonda, although in reality, it was even crazier. In the end, only one example of this car was built, which today makes it one of the rarest hypercars in history. For many automotive fans, the Lotec Sirius is almost a myth, a car that truly existed, but one that only a handful of people have ever seen. And it is precisely this mystery that makes its legend greater today than ever before. The story of the Sirius does not begin in a luxury design studio or in the laboratories of a major corporation. It all began with a man in love with racing and speed. Kurt Lmidt was already building his own racing cars in the 1970s and competing with them in motorsport. He was not a typical businessman. Above all, he was an enthusiast and a perfectionist. During his career, he won, among other things, the German championship in the Group C2 class and achieved success in European sports car racing. Thanks to the experience he gained on the track, he understood perfectly how a fast car should behave. He knew that power alone was not enough. Aerodynamics, weight, balance, and stability at enormous speeds all mattered. That is exactly why his later projects were so extreme. The Lotec company initially dealt with tuning and the construction of specialist bodies. Over time, however, Lmidt wanted to create something of his own, a car that would not be a compromise. The Sirius was meant to be the culmination of all his experience. This was not a marketing project. It was a car built by a man who truly believed he could create the fastest car in the world. Interestingly, the project was created at a time when CAD computers were only just beginning to dominate the automotive industry. Lmidt designed many elements by hand, and he later recalled that he shaped the first forms of the Sirius using an angle grinder and wooden boards in the basement of his home. Work on the Sirius began in the early 1990s during a real technological arms race among supercar manufacturers. Ferrari had the F40, Jaguar created the XJ220, Bugatti was working on the EB110, and McLaren was completing the legendary F1 project. Lmidt knew that if he wanted to make an impact, he had to create something even more extreme. That is how the idea of the Sirius was born. A light, brutally powerful car capable of reaching the magical barrier of 400 kilometers per hour. The car's appearance alone made a huge impression. The body was extremely low, flat, and aerodynamically smooth. The car looked more like a Le Mans prototype than a classic road-going supercar. Its characteristic features included huge glass surfaces, hidden A-pillars, and a futuristic silhouette free of aggressive creases. Unlike the Lamborghini Diablo or Ferrari F50, the Sirius looked minimalist and very modern. Interestingly, many people today notice a resemblance between the Sirius and later Koenigsegg models. The problem is that the Sirius was created much earlier. It can therefore confidently be said that it was a car at least a dozen years ahead of its time. From the beginning, Lmidt also assumed production of a small series of cars. Initially, there was talk of 20 to 50 examples per year, but reality quickly verified those plans. The heart of the Sirius was an engine that is now an absolute legend. The constructor chose the Mercedes M120 unit, a 6-liter V12 known, among other things, from the luxury S-Class W140 and the later Pagani Zonda. Even the standard version of this engine impressed with its refinement and enormous tuning potential. But Lotec Sirius decided to go much further. The engine received two huge turbochargers, more efficient cooling, special intercoolers, and dry sump lubrication. The result was absurd, even by today's standards. At a boost pressure of 0.85 bar, the engine generated around 1,000 horsepower and 1,100 Newton-meters of torque. After increasing the pressure to 1.2 bar, output rose to as much as 1,340 horsepower, while torque reached a monstrous 1,320 Newton-meters. It is worth remembering that we are talking about a car from the early 2000s. These numbers were almost unimaginable. For comparison, the Bugatti Veyron was shown only a few years later. What is more, the Sirius weighed much less than modern hypercars. Thanks to its carbon fiber body and lightweight construction, the car weighed around 1,300 kilograms. This meant a power-to-weight ratio exceeding 1,000 horsepower per ton. Even today, such a figure makes a huge impression. The problem, therefore, was not a lack of power, but the ability to transfer it effectively to the asphalt. Kurt Lmidt's greatest dream was to create the first road-going car capable of exceeding 400 kilometers per hour. Today, we hear similar declarations regularly, but in the 1990s, this was almost science fiction. The McLaren F1 reached around 386 kilometers per hour and was the king of speed at the time. The Sirius, however, was supposed to be even faster. The constructor claimed that a properly configured version of the car could accelerate to around 400 kilometers per hour or more. The engine itself was easily capable of generating the necessary power. The main problem turned out to be the tires. Michelin did not want to approve its tires for speeds exceeding 380 kilometers per hour because at that time there were practically no road cars capable of reaching such values. It was precisely the technological limitations of the tires that became the biggest obstacle for the Sirius. Lotec Sirius planned to conduct tests at the Nardo track in Italy, famous for top-speed attempts. Unfortunately, financial problems meant that full tests never took place. To this day, therefore, the official top speed of the Sirius remains more legend than confirmed fact. Some sources speak of 360 kilometers per hour, others of 380, and still others of a potential 400. Regardless of the exact figure, one thing is certain. The Sirius was among the fastest and most extreme cars of its era. The Lotec Sirius was not merely a powerful car with a large engine. The entire construction of the car was focused on performance. Its base was a carbon fiber monocoque, combined with tubular steel subframes. Such solutions were used mainly in racing. The body was also made of carbon fiber, which allowed the weight to be significantly reduced. The car was very low, measuring only about 112 centimeters in height. Its width, on the other hand, exceeded 2 meters, giving it an extremely aggressive silhouette. Aerodynamics played a key role. The Sirius had a flat floor, aerodynamic tunnels, and a huge rear spoiler generating downforce at high speeds. The constructor took inspiration from Group C cars and Le Mans prototypes. Even the enormous windshield was designed to give the driver excellent visibility, while also minimizing aerodynamic drag. The suspension used double wishbones, racing dampers, and huge Brembo brakes with ventilated discs. The whole package was intended to provide stability at speeds that were completely unattainable for most road cars. The Sirius was therefore not only powerful, but also very technically advanced. The cabin of the Sirius was the complete opposite of luxurious grand tourers. Here, everything was focused on the driver and performance. The interior looked almost like the cockpit of a Le Mans prototype. Getting into the car was difficult because of the wide sills of the carbon fiber monocoque. Once seated, the driver had in front of him a minimalist dashboard with analog gauges partly sourced from Porsche. There were no unnecessary decorations, screens, or luxury additions. There were only the most important switches: the steering wheel, the manual gear lever, and instruments monitoring the work of the powerful V12. The bucket seats were trimmed in leather, but comfort was not the priority. The Sirius was meant to provide the feeling of driving a racing machine approved for road use. Interestingly, despite its raw character, the car was also equipped with air conditioning, power steering, and traction control. Lotec knew that his potential customers from the Middle East expected at least a little comfort. That is why air conditioning was one of the most important pieces of equipment for him. The constructor even joked that without it, Arab customers would not be interested in the car. Although the Sirius generated huge interest at motor shows and in the media, the project very quickly began to consume gigantic sums of money. Lotec himself admitted that the development of the car cost between 6 and 7 million German marks. For a small company, that was an astronomical amount. The market also proved to be a problem. In the 1990s, the world was not yet ready for a niche hypercar costing a fortune and offered by a little-known brand. Potential customers preferred Ferrari, Lamborghini, or McLaren. The Sirius was too exotic and too risky. In addition, the production of each example required an enormous amount of hand labor. Lotec estimated that it would be able to build no more than a few cars per year. In the end, only one complete example of the Sirius was built. The car was completed around 2001, although the project had begun almost a decade earlier. In practice, this meant that the car had partially aged before its official debut. Even so, the Sirius still looked futuristic and, in terms of performance, could embarrass most of its competitors. It is often said that the Lotec Sirius could have become one of the greatest rivals of the Pagani Zonda. Interestingly, both cars used the same Mercedes M120 V12 engine. The difference, however, lay in the construction philosophy. Pagani focused on luxury, design, and exclusivity, while Lotec created an almost brutal machine aimed mainly at performance. The Sirius was rawer, more extreme, and far less civilized. In terms of performance, however, it could confidently compete with later versions of the Zonda, or even with the Bugatti Veyron. Many journalists believed that if Lotec had received proper financing, the brand could have become one of the most important hypercar manufacturers of the 21st century. Unfortunately, reality proved brutal. Pagani had AMG support and very wealthy customers. Lotec was a small manufactory, run by an enthusiast. Even so, the Sirius still commands enormous respect among automotive fans today. Many collectors consider it one of the most underrated hypercars in history. Even today, the technical data of the Sirius looks absurd. Acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour was said to take around 3.7 seconds, although the sprints at higher speeds were even more impressive. The car reached 200 kilometers per hour in less than 8 seconds and could exceed 300 in the time most sports cars were only approaching 200. The enormous torque meant that the Sirius accelerated brutally in practically every gear. The sound of the twin turbocharged V12 was also something special. Drivers described it as a mixture of the howl of a Ferrari Daytona, the operation of a racing prototype, and the whistle of gigantic turbochargers. The car, however, was not easy to drive. Power went only to the rear wheels, and even the enormous rear tires, 345 millimeters wide, struggled to transfer all the power to the road. The Sirius demanded great skill and full concentration. This was not a car for beginner millionaires. One of the reasons why the Sirius achieved legendary status is its extraordinary rarity. Most people have never seen this car in person. For years, photos of the Sirius circulated mainly on internet forums and in automotive magazines. The car practically never appeared in public. It was not regularly tested by journalists, it did not reach showrooms, and no further examples were built. As a result, an aura of mystery grew around it. Many automotive fans did not even believe that the Sirius really existed. In addition, Lotec as a company operated very discreetly. There were no major advertising campaigns or aggressive marketing. This made the Sirius something of an automotive unicorn, a car everyone had heard of, but almost no one had seen. According to official information, only one complete Lotec Sirius was built. There were indeed plans to produce a small series of several dozen units, but they were never realized. Kurt himself said that his company would be able to build a maximum of 4 or 5 cars per year. However, the right financing and a sufficient number of customers never appeared. That is why the Sirius remained an absolute one-off. In the automotive world, there are very few cars with a similar status. Even such exotics as the McLaren F1 or Ferrari F50 were produced in dozens of examples. The Sirius, on the other hand, is a true one-off, a single example built by a small German manufactory. Determining the value of the Sirius is extremely difficult, because the car practically never appears publicly for sale. At the time of its debut, the planned price was around 1 million German marks, or about £380,000. Today, however, it would be a completely different story. The modern collector market loves unique hypercars from the 1990s and the early 21st century. Just look at the prices of the McLaren F1, Jaguar XJ220, or Pagani Zonda. The Sirius is far rarer than all of them. Many experts believe that if the car appeared at auction today, it could reach a value of several million euros. Some estimates even speak of figures exceeding 5 million euros, especially because the car has the status of an absolute one-off. For collectors, its greatest value lies precisely in its history, mystery, and the fact that only one example was ever built. Looking at the Sirius today, it is hard not to wonder what might have happened if Lotec had received proper financial support. The car had the potential to become one of the most important hypercars of its era. It offered futuristic design, enormous power and performance ahead of the competition. Perhaps today, the Lotec brand would be mentioned in the same breath as Koenigsegg, Pagani, or Bugatti. Unfortunately, a lack of money and limited production capabilities meant that the Sirius remained only a fascinating episode in automotive history. Even so, its influence can still be seen today. Many stylistic solutions, as well as the very philosophy of an extremely light and powerful hypercar, later appeared in cars from other manufacturers. The Lotec Sirius is one of those cars that proves motoring is not only about huge corporations and billion-dollar budgets. Sometimes, the most extraordinary machines are born from the obsession of one man. Kurt Lmidt created an almost impossible car, a hypercar capable of competing with the greatest legends in the world despite minimal resources and a tiny company. The Sirius was brutal, uncomfortable, absurdly fast, and completely crazy. That is precisely why it became a legend. Today, when modern hypercars increasingly resemble computers on wheels, the Sirius remains a symbol of a time when what mattered most was the courage of the constructor and pure mechanical passion. It was a car that was supposed to conquer the world, but ultimately became one of the greatest secrets in automotive history.